Why did Takaichi Sanae make a limited compromise under Trump's pressure? This is Jersey News Commentary Channel. This time, U.S.-Japan relations have presented a highly intriguing scene. The United States is advancing military actions in the Middle East, yet encountering a cold response when mobilizing allies. Japan, after initial silence, has begun to signal limited cooperation. So the question arises, why did Takaichi Sanae, known for her hardline stance, not directly refuse, but instead choose a limited compromise? On the surface, this appears to be a typical diplomatic concession, but if we widen the lens to the broader East Asian landscape, it becomes clear that this is not a simple compromise, it is a reluctant choice forced by structural pressures. It must be emphasized that Takaichi does not intend to fight this Middle Eastern war for Trump. Japan's core national interests have never been in Hormuz, but in the East China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. For Tokyo, the real security focus is the rise of China and tensions in surrounding waters, not the Persian Gulf. So, if this is not a core interest, why not simply refuse? The problem is she cannot easily refuse. Because this is not an ordinary military request, it is a test of alliance loyalty. Trump's logic is straightforward: if you expect the United States to bear security risks for you in Asia, then when the United States needs support, you must give something in return. This puts Japan in a dilemma. Refusal may damage alliance trust, compliance may break domestic political and constitutional limits. Therefore, Takaichi's choice is not whether to give, but how much to give, and in what way. Her limited compromise is essentially the result of three layers of constraint. First constraint, constitution and institutional limits. Japan's security policy is always bound by its pacifist constitution. Even after the security legislation reforms, Japan can only exercise a limited right of collective self-defense under strict conditions. It must be directly related to Japan's own survival. But the Hormuz issue is essentially an extension of the conflict between the United States and Iran. If Japan directly dispatches naval forces for escort or combat-related missions, it would face a fatal question: is this Japan's war, or America's war? Once the answer leans toward the latter, legitimacy collapses immediately. And crucially, Japan is a rule of law country. Second constraint, domestic politics and public opinion. Although Takaichi is a hardliner, she is not a dictator who can ignore domestic politics. Japanese society is extremely sensitive to being drawn into war. Especially in a region like the Middle East, which has low direct relevance to Japan's security, public support is even harder to secure. If she rashly sends troops, she would face not only opposition parties, but also pressure from media, voters, and institutions. Therefore, she must carefully control the scale of action. She must signal support, but not cross the line. Third constraint, energy lifeline and real anxiety. This factor is often overlooked, but it is the most practical constraint. Japan is highly dependent on Middle Eastern energy. A large portion of its oil supply must pass through the Strait of Hormuz. This means Japan cannot simply define its stance as supporting or opposing the United States. It must also consider, if the situation spirals out of control, what happens to Japan itself. It cannot stay completely detached, yet it also cannot afford to become a party to the conflict. Thus, it adopts a typical middle strategy: participate, but not deeply, support, but without taking direct risks. The core issue, Japan's security structure. If the above three are practical constraints, the real determinant of Takaichi's decision lies deeper. Japan's security structure. To put it bluntly, Japan dares to be tough on China largely because of the United States. The U.S. nuclear umbrella is the foundation of Japan's strategic confidence. This leads to a fundamental question: if, at a critical moment, Japan says no to the United States, then at an even more critical moment, such as a Taiwan Strait or East China Sea crisis, will the United States say to Japan, then handle it yourself? Facing a political rogue like Trump, who is capable of doing anything, Takaichi is fully aware of this possibility. This is not a theoretical issue, it is a strategic one. So she does not dare to gamble. She must send a signal to Washington: Japan remains a reliable ally. At the same time, she must define the limits of that reliability, to avoid being dragged into a war that does not belong to Japan. A deeper trend in East Asia. What truly matters here is not whether Japan sends a few ships, but the broader trend it reveals: the United States is applying pressure, while its allies are cooling down. Trump's alliance philosophy is reshaping the rules. Alliances are no longer just about security cooperation, but increasingly about direct transactional exchange. How much you contribute determines how much protection you receive. But the problem is, allies do not share identical interests. Europe is unwilling to take risks in the Middle East. Japan does not want to carry the burden of America's global strategy. South Korea remains highly cautious. This reveals a crucial fact: the U.S. alliance system still exists, but its cohesion is weakening, even showing signs of fracture. It is no longer an automatically functioning machine, but a network that requires constant bargaining and maintenance. Takaichi's real choice, not empty-handed, but not bleeding. Therefore, Takaichi's actual strategy is clear: not outright refusal, and not full compliance, but symbolic support, limited participation, and risk isolation. For example, intelligence sharing, logistical support, non-combat assistance, diplomatic coordination. These measures allow her to deliver something in Washington while still passing domestically. This is not weakness, but a typical Japanese strategy: finding space within constraints, and maintaining balance amid risks. Conclusion: not a compromise, but a structural fate. So, returning to the original question, why did Takaichi make a limited compromise? The answer is, she is not bowing to Trump, but to Japan's strategic structure. She cannot afford to lose the United States, yet cannot fully depend on it either. She must be tough on China, yet cannot be dragged into America's global conflicts. This is an almost unsolvable balance. In the longer run, Japan will increasingly face a fundamental question: will it remain a dependent middle power, or become a country capable of independently bearing its own security responsibilities? Until this question is answered, such limited compromises will continue to appear. Because for Japan, the hardest thing has never been choosing a position, but choosing the lesser of two risks. This is less a compromise, and more a kind of national fate. This cautious, calculated approach fully reflects Japan's national character.